Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Matthew Scott and this is part 2 of the transparency and keying tutorials, the second series of tutorials that I've been creating for Grass Valley's EDIUS 6. So we're going to jump straight on in. Hopefully you got some interesting techniques and learned some cool stuff about transparency in the previous tutorial. This one we go a little bit deeper and we start looking at transparency, custom transparencies based on alpha channels. Now alpha channels are really cool because unlike the standard forms of transparency that we've been looking at, an alpha channel allows us to create a custom shape, a custom keyhole to project images through. Now let me show you what I mean by that. I think we should start off firstly by having a look at this cool smoke charge footage that I've actually purchased from Andrew Kramer's website, videocopilot.net. Now he has done an awesome job of what's called keying this footage. What do I mean by keying? Well, if you look at this smoke charge on its own, you think, wow, that looks pretty cool. I mean, we've got an awesome smoke charge with a black background. But that's not entirely true. This piece of footage does not have a black background at all. It has a transparent background. Now, I'm just going to quickly jump over into After Effects and show you what I mean by that. If you look at the same piece of footage, you'll see here that there's no black background at all. There's actually no background. So the transparency of this clip is built into the clip on a separate channel called an alpha channel. Now I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's go back to EDIUS and have a look. By the way, make sure you check out Andrew Kramer's tutorials, his whole website and his products. Seriously, I promote that guy because he is awesome. One, he's a Scorpio, and two, his products are so useful and so worth paying for. Yeah, definitely check out Action Essentials 2, which is where this footage comes from. Now, back to alpha channels. Alpha channels are a form of transparency, just like we were looking at blending modes and using the opacity slider here. They're other forms of transparency. But alpha channels are just this extra level of power that we have. So let me show you what we can do with the transparency track built into an alpha channel. Now that we have this transparent background and we know about it, as soon as we drop that clip on top of another clip, like so, you'll see that there was no need to change the opacity values, there was no need to add a blending mode. We just dropped that footage straight on top and you can see both images at once. Now this is really cool, especially when you're trying to add or composite footage into a scene. Now obviously this smoke charge doesn't really fit this scene. I just wanted to start with a simple example because keying and transparency can be a little bit hard to understand. Now you may not know this, but I bet you've used alpha channels before, and a simple example of that is using text. So I'm going to drop some text down that I've created earlier, that just like the smoke effect before, this text has a transparent background. This text actually has its own built-in alpha channel, and remember the alpha channel represents transparency. So, no doubt you've seen alpha channels before, but you maybe just didn't know how they worked or why they're useful. Well, here's a perfect example. I mean, without an alpha channel, this text would just be on a black background, and then we wouldn't be able to see the car behind it. But this happens automatically with text. The thing it doesn't happen automatically with is a piece of video that does not have an alpha channel, and I'll show you what I mean by that. For example, let's go back to my favorite wheel shot. I'm going to put that on top here. Now you can see this video track, the wheel is on top of this video track, the car driving through, but you can't see through this piece of video until one, we go back to like we did before in the earlier tutorial and adjust the opacity. So now we can start seeing the car beneath it because we're adjusting the transparency. And what you might have just realized is that this transparency track is actually an alpha channel. Now this alpha channel has no shape. Unlike a piece of text, this text has an alpha channel which has a shape. So every piece of video in EDIUS has an alpha channel. But the difference is some alpha channels, some pieces of video or content have custom alpha channels that actually have a shape. And in this instance, the shape is everything around the text. So I'm just going to delete that and go back to our wheel shot. Now remembering here that we have an alpha channel on this piece of footage, but there is no shape to it. It's just one big square. So when the alpha channel is at 100%, we actually can't see through that big piece, that big shape. But if we drop our transparency of the alpha channel to 0, now we can see perfectly through the whole shape. The problem is, the shape is the same size as our screen, so we're not actually getting any effect. Now, what if we were to change the shape of our alpha channel? Well, Thanks to EDIUS 6's new mask tool, we can do just that. So let's drop the mask tool now on top of our top video track. Now, before I go any further, I just want to explain to you the structure of what's happening. So here we have two video tracks, track 1 and track 2. Track 1 is the video track below, and if we turn off track 2, you can see that that is this car footage. The track above it is track 2, which is this wheel, and without any changes to this transparency track, we actually can't see the video track underneath. That's pretty simple stuff, we've covered this before. So, how do we create a custom channel? We're going to use the mask. Now the beauty of the mask is that we can create any shape we like. We can create multiple shapes. But let's just start off with something simple. Let's just grab this drawing rectangle mask and let's just draw a shape over here like so. Now as you can see at this stage, nothing has happened. That's because we haven't changed the transparency of the inside or the outside of our mask. And we can do that simply by dragging this opacity slider. So let's change the opacity of the outside of our mask, which is effectively going to change the shape of our alpha channel. So let's do that now. I can either click in there, highlight, delete and press 0, or I can just drag up and down, and you can see as I do that, we're creating our own custom shape to our alpha channel. So I'm going to leave it at 0 and I'm going to press OK. So now you can see these two tracks interacting with each other just like that smoke charge did. Although this time we're not using the alpha channel that Andrew Kramer created for his smoke charge, we're using an alpha channel that we've created on a piece of video that never had a custom alpha channel. So this is a pretty cool thing to understand, because when you understand how alpha channels work, you can really start getting creative. Now don't forget that we still have access to our opacity track. Just because we've added a custom shape to this alpha channel, to this mixer track, it doesn't mean that we don't have access. We can't control the opacity of that shape. So one, if we go back to the information and have a look at our mask, one, we can change the opacity of the inside of the mask as well, separately to the outside of the mask. But with further control, we can also adjust the opacity of this whole clip. So if I hold down Alt and click on one of these end keyframes here, you can see that I still have access. I still have access to the opacity slider of our new shape. And don't forget that we can even add blending modes to our track, just like normal. So what if I added addition? Now you can see that we are blending the two tracks together just like we would normally, but we also have a custom shape that's giving us transparency. So hopefully you can see now that this opens up a whole new world of creativity. This allows us to get real creative. I mean, we could create an awesome DVD menu or some sort of, title sequence. Actually, I had a play earlier and I came up with this cool looking effect. You can see here that I've used the same principle as this, although I've added a blend mode as well and I've animated the shape. But not only that, you'll notice within this mask that the headlight is slightly offset. So if we move in through time, the whole car is slightly offset, which gives it this cool distorted look. Even if you look at the wheel down here, you see that they don't match. And also the size is different. So let's have a quick look at how I've created this effect. If we start from scratch, I'm going to duplicate this bottom layer. Now a quick way to do that is to click, drag, and then press Control, which will bring up that little plus sign, and as soon as you let go, we have a duplicate. Next up, I'm going to delete the color correction that I've added to this clip. So now we're left with the raw footage, and just like we would expect, we can't see the layer underneath it. So what we need to do is add a mask. So let's go to Effect, and we'll go up to Mask, drop that on. If we double click the mask, similarly, I'm going to draw a rectangle. But this time we're going to animate the rectangle. And there's one thing I want to change about the rectangle's properties, and that's this lock. If we lock the scale of X and Y, it means that if we try and widen our shape, it also adjusts the height. If we try and adjust the height of our shape, it also adjusts the width. We just want to adjust the width only, or we want to basically be able to change the X and Y separately. So all we do is uncheck that. So now we have the ability to stretch that out or shrink it in. Now remembering that just adding a mask alone does nothing at all. We need to at least add a filter inside the mask or in this case, change the opacity of everything outside of the mask. So I'm going to drop that down to 0. And now you can see here is our alpha channel. Here is the transparency based on the shape of our mask. And you can see the final result here on our timeline. And the result is the top track is shining through that hole. This is the new hole of transparency. Pretty cool. So what I'm going to do now is animate that shape. Let's just zoom out of this a little bit. I'm going to click on that drop down, go to 25%. Then I'm going to drag my shape over to the left. And I'm going to click on Shapes keyframe and add a keyframe for all its properties. Now I'm going to scrub forward through time to about here. And then I'm going to move my shape to the opposite side of the screen. And you'll notice EDIUS adds keyframes as soon as I change any movement. So now the cool part is, this shape animates across the screen. The alpha channel animates across the screen. One thing we could add to our animation is adjust the width. So maybe it's thinner at this point, and thicker at this point, and then thinner again at this point. So now we have it moving across the screen and changing its width. So it looks pretty cool. But there's one extra thing I did. You'll notice that there is no offset like we had in our previous shot. There is no difference. The only difference is one's color graded and one's not, right? You know, it looks pretty cool, but what if we just change the size of this top track? Let's go to the layout tool, double click, and if we just expand that, now you can see that it's actually bigger. I've actually expanded it to 107%. So what that's going to do is add this kind of warping effect. So as it runs across the screen, it warps and sort of distorts our image. That looks pretty cool. And finally, you could do one more thing and just offset that top clip by maybe 2 frames. So what I'm going to do is zoom in, move back 2 frames, and then just drag that top clip back. So now they're actually offset slightly just by 2 frames. So you get an even more distorted effect. But this is a really cool effect that you might be able to use, like I said, for like a title sequence or maybe like a DVD menu or something. And finally, we can even add a blend mode to that, or simply just add a color correction to it. So I'm going to go up to YUV curve, drop that on top of my top track. And let's just play with the contrast a little bit. I'm going to brighten it up because I kind of want that warping effect to be like a shinier sort of, yeah, shinier sort of wipe that, you know, brushes across the car. And maybe let's just change the colors a little bit. So now you can see the original, and then we've added it, just made it a lot more punchy. So now press OK, and let's have a look at that effect in play. So we're getting a pretty cool looking effect here. Now what if we wanted to add another mask? Let's just keep going. Let's go back into our mask, and we can draw another rectangle. So I'm going to go back to the start of my clip. I'm going to draw a rectangle here, and by the time, actually now I need to set a keyframe for that rectangle. So if we go to shape 2 and enable keyframes, and then I click add keyframe to all these properties. Now if I move forward in time, I can drag that across there, and move forward in time again, drag it back, move forward in time again, and drag it all the way over here. And then finally, this one's going to be a lot more erratic than the first one. I'm just going to shrink this a bit so I can see what I'm doing. Finally, I want this to end up on the same side. And we could also adjust the width of this as well, just like we did with the other one. Remembering that we need to uncheck that, just so we have a little bit more control over what's happening here. No, I don't like it too wide. Anyway, let's have a look at what that looks like. A little bit erratic, but you get the idea. So now you can see that with a little bit of effort, we can create some really cool effects. And honestly, we have only just touched the surface of this stuff. I mean, I haven't even added a blending mode yet. What if we added that Pro Mist effect like I did earlier? I mean, you can really go crazy with this stuff. You could even animate the color as it slides across the screen. Let's just quickly do that. Let's go Effect, Color Balance. I'm going to drop that on top. And I'm going to enable keyframes for this color balance. The yellow, magenta, cyan. And we're going to add keyframes for all of those. So by the time it gets here, I'm going to make it go pink. And then when it gets here, I'm going to make it go green. And then by the end, a yellow. So now, our swooshy wipey things change color as they animate. So now we're getting like a really cool look. And how far you go is completely up to you. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what is possible. We're just using a duplicate image. It just starts getting really cool from this point on. Okay, so we've seen how we can create these custom shapes, but there's another part of EDIUS that is just really cool. There's another feature. There's a blending mode that allows us to use that custom shape to project one image through on top of another image. Now that sounds a bit confusing, and it actually kind of is, so let's just break it down. Now remember earlier we realized that text layers actually have built-in alpha channels. Okay, so what I want to do now is create some new text, but before we do that, let's just delete the alpha channel that we created for this top layer of video. So I'm going to go into information and just delete my mask. So now we have no alpha channel. Secondly, what I'm going to do is just move that second layer up one. So now there's a gap in between that top video layer and this bottom video layer, because what we're going to do now is create a seeing hole, an alpha channel for this top video to shine through onto this piece of video. So we're going to use text for that, and to do that I'm simply going to go to the quick titler built into EDIUS. The quickest way to do that, no pun intended, is if we select track 2, the blank track, and we click on here, create title in video track. Now what we're going to do is just quickly type supercar, and I'm going to increase the size of that just by holding down shift to constrain the proportions, and I'm just going to increase that to about that big. Next thing I just want to uncheck is the fact that it has an edge. We don't want to have an edge, so I'm going to do more tutorials later on text and how we can use that effectively, but for now this is just a very simple example, and we're talking about transparency anyway, right? So what I want to do now is center this text, and a quick way to do that is just go layout, center horizontally, layout, center vertically. And now if I just click this disk to save, we have our piece of text. Actually, you'll notice that the piece of text did not go to 2V. Why is that? Because the one that we had mapped, my bad, was 1V. So it's a difference between what's mapped and what's selected. This is a selected video track. This is a mapped video track. So what I really needed to do was map 2V, and then this text, as you can see here, here's my text, would have gone to that track. So let's just drag it up there and retrim out this video. And I'm also going to trim the text. So now we have 3 layers, but we can't actually see the text, and we know why, because there's no transparency on the layer above it. But what we're going to do now, we go to Effects, we go to Track Matte, and we're going to place the track matte on the top video layer. Now look what's happened. The top video layer is shining through this text layer. It's shining through the alpha channel of this text layer, and it's being projected onto this bottom video track. So I think the best way to view this, the best way for me to understand it, was that these 2 tracks are now one. These 2 tracks share something. The top track shares the transparency from the text, and the result is this top layer gets projected onto that bottom layer. Now that's pretty cool. Now let me just show you the 2 different modes built into the track matte. So I need to click on my keyer track from the top level, and I'll double click track matte. You'll notice that it has 2 matte types. Now essentially we actually really want to use an alpha matte for this, because remember, text has pure clean alpha mattes built in. We already learnt that earlier. So if we click alpha matte and press OK, you won't really see a difference, but we're going to see when that can make a difference later on. But right now I just want to try and get you to understand that what essentially is happening here is, just imagine that this transparency area, this alpha channel, is being extended down to track 2. So now this whole area from here to here is one alpha channel. But instead of us creating a custom mask like we did earlier with the rectangle, we've created a mask with the text. Pretty cool. Now what if we drop the smoke charge in there instead? Let's have a look and see what that looks like. So we'll delete the text. Now remember that we've still got our track matte on here, and the track matte is set to alpha. But there's no transparency key for the alpha matte to work with, because we haven't given it a mask and there's nothing underneath it. So if we go to our bin, and what I'm going to do now is find the smoke charge, and I'm going to drop that in. Now look what's happening. How cool is this? We're getting the transparency of the smoke charge, we're getting the alpha channel that's built into Andrew Kramer's smoke charge, and it's creating a projection of this top image onto the bottom image. Now this is starting to get really powerful. This is really cool. So we saw how simple it was with text, and we can see how simple this effect is to create with something that's been pre-keyed. But what if something doesn't have a key? What if we want to project the brightness of an image? We want to use the brightness of an image as our alpha channel. Well, we can do that too. So let's have a look at how we can do that. What I'm going to do now is actually use this wheel track as my new alpha channel. So what we're going to do is put the wheel track above the car track. And once again, nothing's happened. We need to make sure we get rid of the track map because we don't need that just yet. What we're trying to do essentially is create our own alpha channel, just like Andrew Kramer did. Now the way to do that is to go into Effect, and if you go up to Color Balance, this is a really simple way to do it, and I think it's the best way to explain it. If you double click Color Balance now, what we're going to do is take all the color out of it, so it's black and white. This allows us to see more clearly how a track map works, how an alpha channel works. Now normally an alpha channel would work because there's an actual hole cut out here. But we don't have a hole cut out here. But what we can do is use black and tell EDIUS that the black part is opaque and the white part is what actually shines through. So what we're going to do now is create quite a contrasty image. Now remember, what I'm doing is trying to create a shape to let the top image shine through, and I want the shape to be the spokes of this wheel. So what I'm doing is just playing with the brightness and contrast and trying to get a nice clean shape. So here's my shape, but nothing's actually happened just yet. So what I want to do now is get a new piece of video, this one. Alright, so I'm going to place this piece of video on top. Now this video on top has no transparency values adjusted as yet. So what we need to do is go to Effect, scroll down to our blending modes, choose Track Matte, drop the track matte on the transparency area, the mixing track of the top layer, and you can see straight away something's happening. Now remember, we don't have an alpha channel on this layer underneath like we did with the smoke or the text, but what the track matte's default setting is using is not an alpha channel at all. It's using luminance. So if we set it to alpha and press OK, you'll notice that there is no effect because this track has no alpha channel. But if we set it to luminance, it's using the black and white area as a luminance keyer. And you can see here, that's what's cutting the hole out. That's what's projecting this top image onto this lower image. So just once again, if we just have a quick look here, this area from the transparency down to the new video track, this whole area is now the alpha channel that projects between these two layers. Pretty cool. So now we've created this awesome look. And one I just refined earlier a little bit better. You can see here I've just added some different color. And look how awesome that looks. If we were to add this to our title sequence with our moving slider bars and stuff and our smoke charges, we've got some really amazing effects. And it all just comes down to having a good understanding of what an alpha channel is and how we can use it. And thanks to this cool track matte, we can really start using alpha channels creatively. I've got some cool flames here that I recorded, and what I'm going to do now is use the brightness of these flames to create an alpha channel, just like we did just now. But I'm going to use it in a slightly different way. So let's go back to our trusty wheel shot. So we'll go to Hong Kong Supercars, grab the wheel shot, and I'm just going to drag that down to my timeline. And remember that I did that cool effect before with the swooshy square things. Well, we're going to try and use that same concept, but slightly differently. What I want to try and emulate here is a really hot sort of, you know, that heat distortion that you see on a road on a hot day when you look into the distance, or you look above flames and you see heat distortion. Well, what I'm going to try and do is emulate that. So I'm going to duplicate this video track, click, drag, press Control. Now I've got a duplicated track. And what I'm going to do now is move that above so I have a gap in between, just like we did in the previous example. But this time I'm going to get my flames, so we'll go to smoke charges, and let's grab one of these flames. This one looks okay. and then I'll drop the flames in between here, and you'll notice nothing happens just yet because we haven't affected any transparency values. So what I want to do now is go Effect, Track Matte, and I'm going to place that on the top level. Now remember the order, this is very important. We want the transparency of this top layer, let's just zoom in here. We want this transparency track to take on the form of the brightness of this flame track. Is that making sense? It'll make sense when you keep practicing what I'm talking about. It takes a little while to understand, but seriously, when you grasp this, it's just awesome. It just opens up so many cool doors. Alright, so let's get back on track. We have our flame footage under here, and we have a track matte here. But the track matte doesn't seem to be doing anything. Why? Because actually all we're doing is projecting the exact same image on the top to the exact same image on the bottom. So we're essentially not seeing any change. But what if I just change the color of that top level? Now we did this before, so let's go YUV curve, drop that on top. And if I just change the color to green, we're not going to leave it like this, but now you can see what's happening. The top green layer is being projected through the flames as a whole onto the bottom layer. So we're not going to keep the green. Let's just go back to the top layer and delete the green. What I'm going to do is offset the top layer by 2 frames. So I'm going to go back 2 frames and offset it. So now, I don't know if you can see that, but there's this distortion going on here. Can you see that? So now it looks like that heat distortion that I'm talking about. How cool is that? And it's as simple as just offsetting that wheel. I mean, we could distort it even more. Let's click on the top layer, go to the layout tool, and just expand it a little bit. So once again, it's even more distortion. And it really does look like that cool heat looking effect. And finally what I'm going to do is go to the actual alpha matte that we've created. I'm going to click on it, go to the layout tool, and this is the flames we're working with here, and I'm going to expand those as well. So now the flames, and I'm going to move them up a little bit, the flames reach higher. And let me just shrink that a little bit so we can see what's going on. I'm going to make them even bigger and just reposition them a little bit. So now the flames reach even higher and our distortion looks more cool. So I'm going to press OK. So I urge you to muck around and just play with track mattes. I mean, this is just me playing in 15 minutes. There's so many things we can do with track mattes. Let's grab the trusty shot of the main feature from our Miami Heat video. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is place flames underneath this guy. So that didn't sound too good either. So let me go to smoke charges, and one of my flames here, this looks pretty cool. Just set an in point and an out point and drop that under there. So now, as you can see, nothing has happened. So what we need to do is drag the effect of track matte onto the transparency of the top layer, and now that's going to use the luminance values from the flames underneath. And straight away, how cool does that look? We can't see his eyes, so let's go to the flames, go to the layout tool, and make them bigger. So now we want them to reach higher. So now we can see his eyes, just so it gives it a much, you know, it's always good to see someone's eyes, right? So let's have a look quickly what that looks like. Pretty awesome. And actually, I recorded these flames at 60p, so what I'm going to do is just delete them, right click, go to properties, and I'm going to change the frame rate to conform to my project, which is 23.98. That way we're going to get a much slower looking flame, which is going to look cool. So, place our flame down here, and let's have a look at that. Much cooler. And once again, if I click on that, go to information, go to my layout tool, and I'm going to expand the size of my flames so they reach higher, and press OK. So now we have this really cool look. But don't forget, even though this looks great the way it is, because we're using the flames to create an alpha channel, this black background is not black at all. This black background is transparent. This top layer of the dude is projecting onto this bottom layer, but we actually have nothing on the bottom layer. So let's put something on there. Let's go back to Hong Kong and let's grab another shot of the car, maybe this one. No, you know what? Let's grab this one. This looks cool. So now we're projecting him onto that bottom layer there. So I'm not saying that necessarily looks really good, but remember our title sequence. I mean, this is a pretty funky clip we're working on. But the principles I'm teaching you, this is really powerful stuff, because we don't necessarily need pre-keyed footage to create awesome alpha channels. We can use luminance-based values. So just to reiterate that, if I click on the transparency track of the top layer, and I go to my information, have a look at the track map, we are in fact using luminance. Now remember that these flames have no alpha channel, so if we change it to alpha, we won't get any result at all. So it has to be luminance. And don't forget that we can invert the luma channel. So if we invert it, it's going to show everything else but the flames. And that might be cool without a background as well, because then you've got these black flames, which looks pretty cool too. So here are just a few awesome examples that you can use transparency and, more specifically, creating your own custom track mats. The track mat is such a powerful new tool. It's new to EDIUS 6, so I urge you to sort of watch this video a few times. Hopefully I'm not being too boring and repeating myself. I actually feel like I've been way too serious in this tutorial, but I also feel like that it's a topic that it took me a while to grasp, and you know, I really wanted to make sure that you understood what was happening here. So I'm sorry if I wasn't so light-hearted this time. I'm sure I'm gonna pick up my tone for the chroma key tutorial. Actually, you know what, that's just as serious too. Maybe the next set. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and more importantly, I hope you learned a lot and that you get to use these skills in your next cool project. Until the next tutorial, I'm Matt Scott, and thanks for watching.